Joe Rogan said, best way to learn jiu-jitsu, best way to get your black belt is to go out and strangle blue belts. This is a very, very true statement. And what he meant by that was that as you're a purple belt, as you're a brown belt, working towards getting your black belt, that going out and strangling white belts is easy peasy. It's a no brainer, right? Somebody who has 6 months or a year of experience is no competition against somebody who's got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years of experience, right? So a purple belt going against a white belt should be only for the purpose of that white belt learning and getting better. A purple belt shouldn't be going out there and smashing and submitting a white belt 5 times in 5 minutes, right? They can, but that's not going to help the purple belt get better. It's not going to help the white belt get better. In fact, it's probably going to help the white belt quit, right? So it's a responsibility there of upper belts to take care of and to help the white belts grow, right? But a blue belt, somebody who has 2, 3, 4 years of experience, they're going to put a challenge up against a purple belt or a brown belt, right? And so a blue belt is going to be well rounded and have some level of defense and attack from just about any position, right? They're going to know some half guard sweeps. They're going to know how if a blue belt gets a purple belt's back, the purple belt's going to have to work, right? Um, and they probably can get out of it, but if the blue belt's efficient and quick, they should be able to submit the purple belt, right? If they get in a position that's advantageous like that, they should be pretty good, right? So blue belts can be pretty dangerous to those developing belts. But how do we get there? All right. Tonight, I want to talk real quick about windows in BJJ. And I think this is a thought that's been rolling around in my head for 2, 3 months, right? I made the transition from a gym where um, I was a fairly big fish in a small pond where it was mostly just white and blue belts when I left, and transitioned to a gym where there's killers, murderers on the mat every night. Purples, browns, our black belt instructor. When we have open mats, there's a half dozen black belts sitting around, um, and there's a tremendous amount of growth that can take place based on that opportunity, right? So what I've been seeing is, my techniques, some are sharper, some are duller, right? We've talked about that before. Are we at a reacting stage or are we still thinking through these things, right? And based on that timing, you're going to see windows, all right? So when I talk about windows, I'm thinking about the opening someone gives you to execute a technique. How much time and what's the opportunity? It's a window of opportunity, right? So how much time do I have to execute that technique? And really, the lower the belt, come back to that in a second. The lower the belt, the bigger the window. All right. I get a mount on a white belt, and there may be all sorts of windows. They may have their hands up, they may have their arms out. I could go for a cross collar, I could go and arm bar them, right? There's lots of opportunities. I could push it down and go for Americana. I could tuck it down and go for a Kimura. Lots of opportunities, lots of windows there. All right. And big windows, right? Even if they know that, oh, shoot, I'm being attacked or my arm is now out and I know that's bad, what do I do? They're still processing a much slower speed, right? And so that continues on, and those windows get smaller as you advance through the belts. And so if I take my technique and use it against a white belt with a huge window, that technique is still good against a black belt or a purple belt, but the window is going to be much smaller, all right? And it may not be as clear. So seeing the window and then being able to react quickly is going to make the difference. All right. So real quick, let's think about an armbar from guard, right? Everybody learns the armbar from guard as a white belt. And we learn, okay, we take their arm, we pull it across, we lock it down, put our foot on the hip, pivot our hips, swing it up, all right, and then we pull on that arm, right? We also probably learn how to do a defense to that. And then there's a counter to that defense. And then there's a sweep to that defense, right? And the question is, how big of a window is being created, right? How big is that window that's there? Because if I take a white belt as a blue belt and I grab him and pull him down, he may not be seeing what's happening. All right. I throw my leg over, start pulling. Oh, now he realizes he's in an armbar. Take that same white belt 6 months or a year later. I put that arm in, I pull across, put my foot on the hip. He realizes he's being armbarred and he lays in the defense. All right. Great. If I'm good and I see the next window is, all right, I'm going to come up and I'm going to defend that and I'm going to turn it into a sweep, that white belt is progressing and getting better, but so am I, right? Does that mean that I can do that to a black belt? Possibly, right? It's a matter of how quick and how effective I am and how sharp my tool is, right? And so I'm thinking about a couple things here. So, how can we make our techniques fit into these windows? First of all, at the first level, we got to develop some competency in the technique, right? And we usually develop competency in the technique and being able to execute it at a just a good solid basic level by working it against lower or equal belts, right? If I'm working something that I learned in class, I'm not going to try it against a purple belt that night. I'll try it against a white belt because their window is going to be much bigger for me to operate in to try and execute that. And I may work on that for a couple weeks until it gets pretty sharp. And once I start improving my timing and can slide it through smaller windows, maybe then I try it against the blue belt, maybe I try it against the purple belt, whomever, right? But I develop that competency and that basics here. So for a white belt, if you're in the game for 6 months or you're in the game for a year, developing that competency on that technique and really drilling and working and using those techniques and saying, okay, I got somebody in my guard, I'm going to try an armbar. All right. That's good. What's going to be better, what's going to be the next level is when you can do it fast enough that they can't react. All right. And recognizing it fast enough and executing it fast enough. So two white belts rolling together, they can work and develop that technique to be much faster. All right. Our next level, how are we going to use how are we going to still use those techniques against those higher belts, and how are we going to continue it in our game as we develop, right? As when I get to purple, I don't abandon techniques. I don't say, oh, well, cross collar doesn't work. Well, it does. Obviously, watch a Roger Gracie film, right? Watch a Roger Gracie video, and you're going to see that a cross collar choke, when done at an extremely sharp level, is tremendously effective. I think of another friend that I have at the gym who's, really focusing on Kimuras right now, and it's just he's bulldozed into that, right? And he's gonna just drive and drive and drive and get that arm and work it and work it and work it until he gets that Kimura. Okay, so improving our timing, being able to develop that through smaller windows, right? And so as those windows shrink, if our timing continues to develop and get sharper as we progress, we can still use those techniques against those higher levels, even when we're at a higher level. All right. Another thing we can do is set traps. We can distract. We can, start setting up combinations. All right, and that's even before developing sequences, but setting a trap. All right, I'm gonna get into your cross collar. and I'm going to pull you down. Meanwhile, my hips are setting up and adjusting to do that arm bar. And while you're worried about that cross collar, I'm going to lay my arm over your arm. And so that what I'm going to do is drop that cross collar. You're going to start to sit up. I'm going to trap that arm, and I'm going to have my hips ready to go, and I'm going to flip that leg over. Okay. So distracting or starting to combine some of these things can be tremendously effective as you progress up through, white, blue, and further on, right? Developing some level of sequence of attacks, right? Stringing those sharp attacks, those well-timed attacks, to a point where you're just overwhelming your adversary. All right, a great example: taking that armbar, omoplata, triangles, like sequencing those together in a series of attacks where you're moving so fast that that person can't keep up, and you're creating those windows because as they close one of those windows, it's opening up a next one, and you can jump on that one, right? So that's another way to really progress is by developing those sequence of attacks. um, and when you do that, you're going to create more windows, right? Knowing that I'm going to do this is going to be the reaction, so then I'm going to immediately move into this, right? Now, does that always work? Well, that's again, what's your competency level, what's your timing level with each of those, and what's your timing level from moving from one to the other. Okay, if they know that that's also a logical sequence, then those windows are going to shut ahead of time, right? I try to I had a combination sequence. I was locked under a triangle, and I immediately tried to go to an omoplata last night against a black belt. And as soon as I shifted my hips and thrust my leg down, that arm came pulling out. Why? It wasn't that was the same technique that I've used against whites and blues and purples recently and had some level of effectiveness. But in this case, he knew it was coming. The window wasn't there. He created a window to bait me in there and then immediately slammed it shut. Okay. That's what you're dealing with when you deal with, a black belt. All right. They're just 20 steps ahead of you. All right. Those windows are so tiny. It's really hard to hit them. But what you can do, the next level, is approach from different angles, not approaching techniques from a non-traditional approach, not like you were taught in class of like, okay, now I'm going to grab this and swing this over. I realized this, and as well as setting traps, even when I was a white belt competing, I would pull people into my guard and hold them, try a cross collar. All right, it's not working. Try a little of this, it's not working. Okay, and just pull them down and keep them down for a little bit. After 2 minutes of just being pulled down and fighting and fighting and fighting, sometimes they would get tired and frustrated, lose control of their decision making when it came to how they were going to break the guard, and they would place that arm right square on my sternum and try and stand up with all of their might, right? And that immediately turned into an armbar because I would just grab a hold and I would kick my leg up and over and pull them right into an armbar. Okay, so that kind of connects with setting that trap. I let them go so they would posture up, they put their arm down there, and they try and break that guard, but they were doing it after 2 minutes of just being exhausted. 2 minutes of fighting, 2 minutes of fighting back, 2 minutes of sitting there going, all my friends and family are watching and my teammates, and I'm going to be embarrassed. I got to get the heck out of here. And they did it in the quickest fashion, but it wasn't the most efficient and it wasn't the safest for them, right? So also approaching from different angles, you can think about shooting a triangle at a weird time, or going for that armbar at an odd time, or quickly taking them back through some sort of Barambola kind of thing, right? So approaching and shooting those techniques at the right time can be very positive as well. I got feedback from one of the upper belts in our gym the other night that I was, I was attacking from an unorthodox angle, and that's why I was having success um, with certain attacks. Was I finishing? No, but I was having success attacking, and that was, getting into it is just good. Maybe not being able to finish, that's more of developing that competency, you know, against those higher belts, right? And that will move you up as well. Okay. So if you are a, you know, 1, 2 stripe white belt, make sure you're developing the competency on these techniques, and make sure you're working with those other guys who are, you know, a year or less in, right? Then improve your timing by working with the higher white belts, right? Try and see when you can, you develop that armbar from guard, great. Now work on it with, some better people, all right? And try not to just survive but get there, all right? And then start to set traps. I think you can do that as a white belt. You can set some traps, all right? Especially with other white belts, and maybe even some blue belts, right? Then start working on developing a sequence of attacks. I think that really comes more as a blue belt, maybe a certain niche within your game of guard play, or from the back you can kind of develop that, or from the mount. I love looking for, 2 or 3 prong attacks. I like, from mount, putting and trying to get that collar and getting that hand in that collar. And what that does is, by getting that hand in that collar and going under that arm, usually that creates that trap for that person, and you sets up an easy arm bar. Or if they don't defend it, they don't defend their collar, you just choke the shit out of their collar, right? So these are my suggestions for you guys, for white and blue belt, to help you progress, and purple belts and on. Tell me if any of this makes sense, but how we can make these techniques and continue to develop these techniques, and to continue to use these techniques that we learn as white and blue belts on all the way through our careers. All right. Thanks.